I still remember the way they looked at me that morning. Polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. The kind that said you don't belong here. The conference room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and expensive perfume. I'd rehearsed every possible answer for weeks, even memorized their company's entire portfolio. But the moment I opened my mouth, their expressions changed. "Where are you from exactly?" one of them asked, dragging the word from like a thread he meant to unravel. "Karachi," I said, careful with my syllables. His smirk widened. "Ah, that explains the accent." A few soft chuckles floated around the table. My stomach clenched, but I kept my smile steady. "It's an accent," I replied, "not a flaw." They laughed again, gently, as if they were being generous. The HR director flipped through my resume, pretending to be impressed. "You're overqualified for this position," she said, "but communication skills matter here." The others nodded, eyes glinting with amusement. Communication skills, meaning your voice doesn't sound like ours. When the interview ended, I walked out holding the last shreds of my confidence like glass that could shatter with one more careless word. Outside, the Portland rain greeted me with soft pity. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the windshield blur into gray streaks. My reflection looked small in the mirror. Wet hair, trembling lips, and eyes that refused to cry. I had given them everything. Grades, effort, professionalism. But to them, all they'd heard was an accent. That night, I recorded myself speaking in English, over and over again. I repeated sentences until my throat hurt. I mimicked podcasts, TED Talks, even late-night news anchors. I wanted to erase what they mocked, to blend in so no one would ever make that face again. But somewhere around 2 a.m., as my voice echoed through the tiny apartment, a question hit me like a slap. Why was I fixing something that wasn't broken? 2 weeks later, a polite rejection email arrived. "We've decided to pursue other candidates whose communication style better aligns with our client expectations." I read it 3 times. Better aligns, meaning sounds more American. I didn't delete the email. I printed it and pinned it above my desk. A reminder, not of rejection, but of reason. I freelanced for months, branding projects, small marketing jobs, anything that would pay rent. My accent didn't matter when the client never saw my face. My work spoke louder. Slowly, my portfolio grew. But so did the memory of that smirk, the condescension dripping from every word. It became fuel. One night, while working on a logo for a local bakery, I had an idea. What if I built my own firm, a place where the only thing that mattered was skill, not how someone pronounced strategy? I stayed up till dawn sketching the first drafts of what would become Lingua Creative. The name came from the Latin for language, because language was supposed to connect people, not divide them. For the first few months, it was chaos. My dining table became the office. I convinced 2 college friends, Maya, a designer, and Rihan, a software developer, to join me. We pitched to local businesses, cold emailed startups, sometimes begging for 5 minutes of their time. Most ignored us. The ones who didn't often hesitated after hearing my voice. "Oh," they'd say on calls, "I thought you were someone else." But every now and then, one would stay. And when they did, they realized we were good, better than the polished agencies that had turned me down. We delivered early, over-delivered always. Slowly, the cracks started appearing in the walls that had kept me out. By year 2, Lingua Creative had 8 clients and enough revenue to rent a proper office. I remember unlocking that glass door for the first time. White walls, empty desks, sunlight slicing across the floor like promise. My heart swelled with something fierce, something that felt a lot like vindication. I hung the printed rejection email on the wall behind my desk. My private trophy. Still, there were moments of doubt. Investors I pitched to smiled the same way the interviewers once had. Polite, patronizing. "You've built something impressive," they'd say, "but to scale globally, you'll need someone more fluent." One man even suggested hiring a Western face to represent the company at meetings. I smiled through it all, but inside, I made a vow. I'll never let someone else speak for me again. Then came the turning point, a proposal request from Viridian Dynamics, one of the largest marketing conglomerates in the state, the same company that had mocked my accent 5 years earlier. Their email felt almost surreal. "We're seeking innovative branding partners for our multicultural outreach division." I read it twice. They wanted me, the girl they had laughed at, to help them reach the very people they once dismissed. I didn't reply immediately. I spent the night walking through the city, neon lights reflecting off wet pavements. The irony was almost poetic. I thought of my younger self sitting in that car, rain blurring everything, believing she wasn't enough. I whispered into the night, "We're going back. Not for them, but for us." The next morning, I drafted the proposal. It was bold, maybe too bold. I included samples of our campaigns, brands that had thrived under our storytelling approach, using diversity as power. I didn't hide my accent in the attached voiceover reel. I highlighted it. "We specialize in authentic voices," I wrote, "because authenticity sells better than imitation." When Viridian's executive board invited me to present, I wore the same shade of lipstick I'd worn that humiliating day: rosewood, confident, unapologetic. As I entered their glass building, the same receptionist looked up, not recognizing me. The elevator ride to the 12th floor felt like ascending through 5 years of silence. Inside the boardroom, I saw some familiar faces. The HR director from my interview sat near the end, older now, but still wearing that polite smile. I set up my presentation calmly, letting the silence stretch just long enough for discomfort to creep in. Then I began speaking, in my accent, clear and proud. "Our agency believes language isn't a barrier," I said. "It's a bridge." For the next 40 minutes, I laid out data, strategy, creativity, every reason they needed us. By the time I finished, the room was quiet in a different way, respectful, awed. The same HR director cleared her throat. "You've built quite the company," she said. I smiled. "You helped me build it," I replied softly. 2 weeks later, Viridian signed a 3-year partnership with Lingua Creative. The deal changed everything. Within a year, we expanded internationally, opening offices in Toronto, Dubai, and London. I stopped counting how many times journalists asked about my remarkable rise. I always gave the same answer. They gave me rejection. I gave myself direction. 5 years after that first deal, Viridian hit financial trouble. Mismanagement, debt, the usual corporate implosion. When their shares plummeted, I didn't hesitate. Through a shell investment group, Lingua Creative acquired controlling interest. Overnight, the company that once rejected me became part of mine. The day the paperwork was finalized, I stood again in that same boardroom. Same table, same view, different story. The receptionist smiled nervously, calling me Ms. Khan. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I walked to the head of the table, placed my hands on the polished wood, and whispered to the empty chairs. "You said I wasn't fluent enough." But I spoke the language of persistence. That evening, I returned to my apartment, the one I'd kept all these years, even after buying a house in the hills. It reminded me where I'd started. Rain tapped against the window like an old friend. I poured myself tea, sat at the desk where Lingua Creative had been born, and opened a new email draft titled, "To the Girl Who Thinks Her Voice Doesn't Matter." I began to write. Not for investors, not for clients, but for the millions of women who've been told to soften, neutralize, or hide the very thing that makes them unique. "Keep your accent," I typed. "It carries your story." When I hit send to my newsletter list, I didn't expect what came next. Thousands of replies flooded in, messages from women in India, Nigeria, Brazil, even small towns in America. "They laughed at my accent too," one wrote. "But now I know its power," another said. "You made me want to speak louder." Reading them, I realized revenge had quietly transformed into something bigger. It wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It was about giving others permission to be right as they are. A month after the acquisition, headlines read, "Immigrant-founded firm acquires Viridian Dynamics in historic deal." I tried not to smile when I saw it printed across every business outlet. The same company that once decided I was unfit to represent clients now carried my signature on every paycheck. But it wasn't arrogance that warmed me. It was closure, the kind that doesn't need applause. The first all-hands meeting under new ownership filled the same glass auditorium where years ago I'd waited nervously for my interview slot. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rows of employees whispered when I stepped on stage, cameras flashing, curious eyes studying the woman whose name they'd only read in memos. I paused, letting the silence settle before speaking. I was once told my voice didn't fit this company. I began, microphone steady in my hand. Today my voice leads it, and yours will too. Every accent, every background, every way of seeing the world. We build better when we sound different. The applause started hesitantly, then grew until it filled the room. I felt something shift, this time not in me, but around me. The walls that once excluded now echoed with possibility. Afterward, the HR director, the same woman who'd chuckled during my interview, approached me. Lines of fatigue etched her face. "I remember you," she admitted quietly. "I didn't think you'd come back like this." "Neither did I said with a small smile. "But life's funny that way. It gives second chances to first impressions." She nodded, words failing her. For the first time, there was no mockery in her eyes, only respect, maybe even regret. In the months that followed, I changed everything about Viridian. We introduced global mentorship programs, language-inclusive marketing, and flexible hiring that favored talent over tone. Our tagline became, "Different voices, one vision." Investors loved it. Employees felt it. Clients responded with loyalty we'd never seen before. At night, though, when the applause faded and the office lights dimmed, I'd still hear echoes of that old voice in my head, the younger me, sitting in her car under the rain, wondering if she'd ever be enough. Sometimes I'd whisper to her through the quiet, "You were always enough. You just needed to stop asking permission." Success brought invitations, conferences, podcasts, glossy magazine spreads. During one interview, a journalist asked, "Do you ever wish you'd lost the accent?" I laughed softly. If I did, I'd lose the story too. She smiled, writing the line down like it was a quote worth printing. Maybe it was. One afternoon, I was speaking at a university panel about women in leadership. A girl in the audience, maybe 22, raised her hand. "They make fun of my accent in class," she said, voice trembling. Sometimes I just stay silent so I don't embarrass myself. I looked at her and saw myself. The same fear, the same desire to disappear. "Silence protects them, not you," I told her. "Every time you speak, you teach someone how courage sounds." The room fell silent, but this silence carried understanding, not judgment. That night, she sent me an email. "After your talk, I volunteered to lead our next presentation," she wrote. My hands shook, but I did it. "Thank you for helping me find my volume." I reread that message 10 times. That's when it hit me. Revenge stories end with triumph, but legacy stories continue with transformation. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to multiply wins. So I launched the Accent Forward Initiative, a mentorship and funding program for immigrants and first-generation professionals who'd been overlooked because they didn't sound standard. Within a year, we trained over 200 women in communication, leadership, and business development. The program wasn't charity. It was revolution disguised as opportunity. At our first annual gala, I looked out over a sea of faces. Nigerian engineers, Pakistani designers, Mexican filmmakers, Korean marketers, all speaking confidently, their words laced with melody. No one tried to flatten their vowels or hide their roots. The air felt alive with the sound of difference. After the event, as I stood alone on the balcony, my husband Rayhan, yes, the same developer who'd started with me at that dining table office, handed me a glass of sparkling water. "You changed their world," he said. I shook my head. "They changed mine." He smiled, touching the rim of his glass to mine. To the girl who was once told to fix her voice, I raised mine higher. And to the woman who used it anyway. Life had a way of folding back on itself, offering symmetry in unexpected places. Months later, while reviewing Viridian's archives, I stumbled upon an old HR document. Candidate, Aisha Khan. Accent concerns noted by panel. I read it twice, a bittersweet smile curving my lips. I kept the file, not as anger, but as proof of evolution. One rainy evening, a notification pinged on my phone. A message request from an unfamiliar name. When I opened it, my breath caught. "Hi Aisha," it read. "You might not remember me, but I was one of the people in your interview panel years ago. I left the company not long after. I saw the news about your acquisition and wanted to say I was wrong. I judged what I didn't understand. Congratulations on everything you've built." I stared at the screen for a long time. For a moment, I considered replying. Then I typed, "Thank you. Growth sounds good on everyone." I hit send and felt a weight lift. Final, quiet, absolute. Weeks later, Viridian's anniversary approached. We decided to hold the celebration in the same hall where it all began. I stood backstage listening as the MC introduced me. The audience applauded before I even stepped out. The stage lights hit my face, warm and blinding. "I used to think revenge meant proving someone wrong," I began. "Now I think it's about proving yourself right." Laughter, soft and affirming, rippled through the crowd. "They mocked my accent once," I continued, "but that accent built a language of its own. A language of resilience, of belonging, of strength." A murmur of agreement swept the room. I ended the speech with a promise. "To every voice that's been told to sound smaller, you are already fluent in enough." Afterward, a woman from the cleaning staff approached me timidly. Her English was broken, hesitant. "Your story," she said, placing a hand on her heart, "makes me feel not ashamed to talk." I squeezed her hand. "Never be ashamed of the sound of where you come from." As she walked away, I realized impact doesn't always arrive in applause. It shows up quietly, in courage borrowed and passed along. That night, I drove home with the windows down, letting the city air tangle in my hair. The rain had stopped, but streets still glistened. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, older, surer, eyes steady. For the first time, I didn't see the girl they'd laughed at. I saw the woman who owned the room, the brand, the story. When I reached home, I found a letter waiting on the counter. The envelope carried no return address, just a single word written in careful script. "Mom." I opened it slowly. Inside was a short note in Urdu. "When you left, I feared the world would break you. Instead, you broke the world's expectations. I may not have understood your dreams, but I'm proud of the woman you became." Tears blurred the ink, but I smiled through them. Some apologies arrived too late to change the past, yet right on time to soften its edges. I placed the letter beside the framed rejection email on my wall, beginning and closure side by side. A week later, as our company prepared to launch a new campaign called Voices Rising, I walked through the office greeting my team. Each desk hummed with accents, British, Filipino, Arabic, Spanish, all weaving together into the rhythm of creation. It sounded like music. "Ma'am," Maya called from across the hall. "The new ad is ready for final review." On the screen, our video opened with a montage of faces from around the world. A voiceover, my voice, spoke softly. They said our accents were barriers. We turned them into bridges. The footage shifted to laughter, meetings, celebrations. A chorus of voices sang the same line in different languages. The final frame faded to black with the tagline, "Lingua Creative, where every voice leads." Applause erupted in the room. I nodded, satisfied. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. Later, standing alone by the window, I watched the skyline shimmer under city lights. Somewhere below, a young woman might be rehearsing for her own interview tomorrow, afraid her voice isn't enough. I hoped she'd see my story and realize she doesn't have to change her accent to change her life. My phone buzzed. A text from Rihan. "Coming home?" "Dinner's waiting, on my way," I replied, grabbing my coat. As I stepped out of the office, I turned off the lights one by one, each click echoing softly against the walls that once held laughter at my expense. Now they held legacy. When I reached the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored door. Same woman, same accent, same unwavering smile. And for the first time in a long journey, I whispered to myself, "They mock the sound of my story." But I made sure the world heard it anyway. The doors closed. The city kept shining, and my voice, once mocked, became the sound of success itself.